You good? No. It's okay. I didn't quite catch the end of that.
Don't rock the jukebox. I want to hear some Jones.
On a bone-cold New Year's Eve in 2022, while the rest of the world celebrated with fireworks, champagne, and hopeful resolutions, one small Louisiana town fell into silence as tragedy struck with a cruelty that no one saw coming. In the blink of an eye, 16-year-old John Foster's world shattered into unrecognizable pieces when he lost the two people who meant everything to him, his best friends Maggie Dunn and Caroline Gill, in a horrific car crash that would ripple across the entire community and haunt him for the rest of his life. It wasn't just any accident. It was the kind of incident that makes national headlines, sparks outrage, and leaves an entire town paralyzed with grief. A high-speed police chase involving a stolen vehicle ended in disaster when an Addis police officer, flying through a red light, plowed into the girl's car without warning, killing Maggie and Caroline instantly and severely injuring Maggie's younger brother. And for John, who saw Maggie and Caroline as sisters, it was more than just grief. It was a complete unraveling of everything he believed in. That night didn't just rob him of friends, it snatched away his innocence, his sense of safety, and the simple joy of being young. But in the eerie silence that followed the screams and sirens, something else began to stir inside him, something raw, painful, and desperate to be heard. As he sat by the edge of the bayou in the days after the accident, numb with sorrow, clutching his guitar like a lifeline, John began to write, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. He needed a way to survive the darkness. What emerged wasn't just a song, it was an emotional cry carved into melody, a musical confession soaked in heartache. The world wouldn't hear it for a while, but when it finally did, it would stop millions in their tracks. This wasn't a made-for-TV drama. This was real, unfiltered trauma from a boy who hadn't even finished high school yet. But even in his lowest moment, John wasn't seeking fame. He wasn't trying to go viral. He was simply trying to make sense of a world that had betrayed him. That one night didn't just set off a chain of sorrow, it lit the fuse on a journey of healing, music, and ultimately redemption. And from that wreckage, a voice was born, one that the world couldn't ignore, and one that even John himself never expected to have. What came next would be nothing short of astonishing. Long before the lights of American Idol ever found him, before tragedy etched heartbreak into every note he sang, John Foster was just a quiet, soft-spoken boy growing up on the west bank of the Mississippi River in the tight-knit town of Addis, Louisiana, a place so small and intimate that secrets didn't stay hidden for long, and everyone knew your name before you could spell it. It was a town of church bells, gumbo pots, and Friday night football, where tradition carried weight and family came first. But even as a child, John stood apart. While other kids played ball in dusty fields or lost hours to video games, John would sit alone with headphones wrapped around his ears, utterly captivated by the haunting voices of George Strait, Merle Haggard, and Keith Whitley, voices that sounded like home, like truth, like something too big for a child to understand, but too deep for him to ignore. His obsession with music wasn't a phase. It was a calling so loud it drowned out everything else. By the time he was a teenager, it became clear to everyone that John wasn't just different. He was driven. He wasn't the type to cut corners or lean on excuses. He excelled in school not because he had to, but because he expected that of himself. In 2024, he walked across the stage at Brusley High School, not just as a graduate, but as the valedictorian, proving that brilliance can come wrapped in humility. And while most kids that age were still trying to figure out who they were, John already had two identities: the scholar and the singer. Now balancing his first year at Louisiana State University with a music career that refuses to slow down, John finds himself walking a tightrope that would overwhelm most adults, let alone a teenager still learning to live with scars that never fully healed. But this is where John thrives, in the tension, in the in-between, where the expectations are crushing but the stakes are personal. He isn't chasing fame blindly. He's walking with purpose, guided by the rhythm of something deeper, something that was born not in a studio, but in a small town where pain and pride live side by side. And though the world is just starting to hear his name, in Addis, they've always known John Foster was never ordinary. He was the kid with the quiet eyes and the louder soul, the one destined to turn pain into poetry and dreams into something real. When most teenagers pick up a guitar, it's to strum along to their favorite songs or chase a fleeting dream of stardom. But for John Foster, that first chord was survival. In 2022, reeling from the devastating loss of Maggie and Caroline, two girls who had been like blood to him, John didn't reach for a microphone to be seen, he reached for it to be heard by the only person who mattered, himself. He needed a way out of the suffocating silence, a way to scream without making a sound, and that six-stringed piece of wood became his confession booth. Alone in his room, in the dim light of grief, John began to write, not polished songs designed to chart, but raw pieces of his broken heart stitched together with trembling hands. It wasn't long before people started to notice. What poured out of him wasn't flashy or commercial, it was honest, old soul country with a neo-traditional twist that made even the most jaded listeners stop and listen. There was something haunting in his voice, something far beyond his years, and by the end of 2022, that something caught fire. He wasn't just playing local open mics or backyard gigs, he was already being honored internationally. His song Someone to Sing To, a delicate, aching ballad straight from the depths of his wounded soul, won him the Traditional Songwriter Award from the prestigious Schref International Competition in Germany, placing his name on a global stage before he'd even finished high school. But accolades were never his fuel. What drove John was the need to turn his sorrow into something meaningful, and he sharpened his craft by performing everywhere he could, from dusty Louisiana bars to crowded parish halls, where the clink of beer bottles was often the only applause. Along the way, he shared stages with country legends like John Schneider and Doug Stone, not as a novelty act, but as a rising peer. He absorbed everything they taught him, like a sponge soaking up decades of wisdom, blending old-school authenticity with a voice still trembling from fresh wounds. And through every note he sang, one thing became crystal clear. This wasn't a teenager playing dress-up in cowboy boots. This was an artist born from the ashes of personal tragedy, using music not as a vehicle to escape, but as a lifeline to hold on to. John Foster didn't find music. It found him, wrapped him in its arms, and whispered, "Survive." While grief carved the contours of John Foster's music, it was faith that became the anchor keeping him steady in a world that often felt like it was collapsing beneath his feet. In the heart of Addis, Louisiana, where traditions run deep and Sunday mornings begin not with alarm clocks but with church bells, John wasn't just another face in the pews, he was the voice that stirred souls. A devout Catholic raised with strong spiritual values, John's connection to music didn't start on a stage or behind a microphone. It began within the quiet, sacred walls of St. John the Baptist Catholic Church, where hymns echoed through stained glass windows and the scent of old wood mixed with incense. It was there, in that modest sanctuary, that John first found the courage to let his voice rise above a whisper. But it wasn't just about the songs, it was about the message. Every time he performed, whether during mass, funerals, or local charity events, he poured his belief into the lyrics like a man testifying his truth. His faith was never for show. It was embedded in the way he sang, in the way he carried himself, in the humility that made him approachable even as his star began to rise. As his community watched him turn tragedy into melody, they didn't just see a teenager coping, they saw a young man being refined by fire and guided by something higher. His music didn't preach, but it healed. It didn't judge, but it invited. And in a world obsessed with artificial perfection and curated images, John's authenticity, rooted in his spiritual foundation, felt like a revelation. So when he stepped onto the American Idol stage, it wasn't just talent that set him apart, it was conviction. From the moment he greeted the judges with home-cooked Cajun food, he wasn't trying to impress. He was offering a piece of his soul, his culture, and his belief that even in the darkest valleys, God walks beside you. The people of Addis saw it clearly. They saw how the quiet boy from church became the voice of their pain, their pride, and their hope. And while the rest of the country was just getting to know his name, those pews had long known what the world would soon discover. John Foster wasn't just singing songs, he was delivering truth soaked in spirit, strengthened by suffering, and shaped by an unshakable faith. When John Foster walked into the American Idol audition room in 2025, he didn't burst in with swagger or flashy clothes. He stepped in quietly, humbly, carrying two things that would leave a lasting impression: a plate of homemade Cajun food and a heart full of stories the world hadn't yet heard. In a competition built on spectacle, John's authenticity hit the judges like a breath of fresh bayou air. Before he sang a single note, he gave them a taste of his roots, literally gumbo and love from Louisiana. It wasn't a gimmick, it was gratitude, a subtle nod to where he came from and the people who molded him. Then he opened his mouth to sing and the room changed. His voice, deep and warm with the weight of lived experience, didn't just carry a melody, it carried a truth that silenced the noise of television production and made the judges lean in. He wasn't there to impress them with vocal acrobatics or perfectly rehearsed choreography. He was there to connect, to let them feel something real, and they did instantly. His performance wasn't showy. It was storytelling. You could hear the church pews in his tone, the late-night writing sessions soaked in tears, the hometown that raised him and the tragedy that scarred him. The judges didn't just see a contestant, they saw a soul laid bare. But what made it unforgettable wasn't just his voice, it was the quiet power of presence, the unshakable calm of someone who had already faced life's worst, and emerged not bitter, but brave. As the audition aired to millions, social media lit up with one burning question: who is John Foster? And more importantly, how had no one heard of him until now? In that one performance, he managed to do what many hopefuls couldn't across an entire season. He became unforgettable. But what no one knew then was that the audition was only the beginning. Because while the judges were charmed and the viewers intrigued, John had something far more powerful waiting just beneath the surface. A song that would shake the nation, a performance that would leave even the most hardened audience in tears, and a story that would soon redefine what it means to sing from the soul. The Cajun food was a gesture. The voice was a gift. But the storm he was about to unleash, that was something no one saw coming. There are songs that entertain, and then there are songs that cut through skin and go straight to the soul, songs born not in studios, but in heartbreak. For John Foster, Tell That Angel I Love Her wasn't just a performance piece, it was the bleeding wound of his past poured into melody. A song he never wanted to write, but had no choice but to. It was his way of speaking to the two girls he lost on that cruel New Year's Eve, Maggie Dunn and Caroline Gill, when a high-speed police chase ended in a violent collision that claimed their lives and shattered his own. In the days that followed the crash, John found himself sitting by the bayou, clutching his guitar like a lifeline, his heart too broken to form sentences. And in that silence, a line came to him: "Tell that angel I love her." He later described it as the most beautiful yet most horrific thing I've ever created. It wasn't written to impress, it was written to survive, to honor, to say the goodbye he never got to say. And when he finally chose to perform it, he didn't debut it at a private event or upload it quietly to the internet. He stood on the biggest stage of his life, during the top 20 episode of American Idol, with Maggie's mother sitting in the audience, her eyes glistening with unspeakable emotion. What happened next wasn't a performance, it was a national reckoning. As John sang each line, trembling but unwavering, the audience fell into a stunned silence, and by the final chord, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The judges didn't even try to hide their tears. Viewers at home were wrecked. The performance didn't just trend, it transcended. It reminded America why music matters, why grief must be felt, and why some stories are too powerful to be staged. This wasn't reality television drama. It was raw truth, It was the sound of a young man grieving, healing, and reaching across time and loss to send a message into the heavens. And what made it all the more haunting was that John never milked the moment. He didn't turn tragedy into theatrics. He let the song speak, let the pain rise and fall like the Mississippi tide, and trusted the world would understand. And it did. Tell That Angel I Love Her became a defining moment, not just in the season, but in Idol history. Because in those 3 minutes, John Foster did what no special effects, no high notes, no viral gimmicks ever could. He made millions feel what it's like to lose everything and still find a way to sing. As John Foster's voice echoed across the nation and his fan base multiplied with every soulful performance, it didn't take long for the darker side of fame to creep in, the twisted underbelly of internet speculation, baseless rumors, and trolls who seemed determined to tear down what they didn't understand. While his story touched hearts, it also stirred suspicion among online skeptics who couldn't believe that someone so young could carry so much emotional depth, so much poise, so much raw power in his lyrics. The attack started small, whispers that he wasn't really from Addis, claims that he was older than he claimed, even bizarre accusations that he was secretly related to country legend Dwight Yoakam, or had already been signed by a record label long before his Idol audition. Some said his story was too perfect, his grief too polished, his humility an act, and in the echo chambers of social media, those whispers grew louder, amplified by keyboard warriors who couldn't fathom that a real small-town kid could rise without an agenda. But John didn't hide. He didn't hire a PR team or issue some sterile statement crafted by lawyers. Instead, he opened his phone, logged onto his personal Facebook page, and addressed it all head-on with the same sincerity that had drawn millions to his music. "I am 18 years old," he wrote plainly, "not 24. I'm from Addis, Louisiana. Always have been. And no, I am not signed to any label." It wasn't a rant, it wasn't a defensive outburst. It was a quiet reclaiming of his truth. Just a kid who'd been through more pain than most adults and chose to sing his way through it instead of letting it swallow him whole. But what made his response even more powerful was what it revealed: that even in the face of lies, scrutiny, and viral cynicism, John Foster remained exactly who he'd always been, grounded, honest, and unshaken. He didn't need to convince anyone of his authenticity, because those who had truly listened, really listened, already knew. The trolls may have had their moment, but they underestimated the strength of a voice that had been forged in grief and faith, not fame. And while they typed from behind screens, John kept showing up on stage, night after night, pouring truth into every lyric, while his community, his fans, and his growing audience doubled down on their support. Because in the end, it wasn't the internet that built John Foster's story. It was heartbreak, humility, and a small town that knew the difference between real and noise. In a world where fame often isolates and turns hometowns into distant memories, John Foster's story flipped the script, because instead of leaving Addis behind, he carried it with him in every note, and in return, the town wrapped him in a level of loyalty that defied logic and geography. Addis didn't just support John, they lifted him, armored him, and made his journey their own. When he stepped onto the Idol stage, it was as if every porch light in town turned on at once, every neighbor became a distant cousin, and every prayer whispered in church on Sunday included his name. From Emma's Garden in Port Allen to the front steps of Addis Town Hall, signs appeared like wildfire: "We are Addis, proud of you." Local businesses offered voting incentives, schools played his performances in classrooms, and complete strangers became evangelists for his voice. In an age of fractured attention and fleeting loyalty, Addis became the rare exception, a community that didn't just cheer for a star, but fought for their son. And behind the scenes, his family stood firm, the quiet force keeping him grounded while everything around him changed. His parents, faced with a gut-wrenching decision, chose faith over fear when American Idol called. They let him press pause on college, on the stability they had always envisioned for him, because they knew this moment was bigger than academics. It was a chance to turn pain into purpose, to let the world see what they had always known, that their boy wasn't chasing lights, he was chasing healing. Their support wasn't performative, it was personal, quiet, and unshakable. But it wasn't just the signs, the social media posts, or the voting drives that proved Addis's love. It was the energy, the way the entire town shifted to make space for one of their own to shine. And while John stood under the bright lights of Hollywood, with cameras and producers buzzing around him, he remained tethered to a place that didn't care about fame. They cared about him. Every time he opened his mouth to sing, he was sending a message back home. I haven't forgotten you. And from miles away, they answered back in unison, we've never stopped believing in you. In an industry known for chewed-up talent and overnight sensations, John had something most artists never find, a home that would never let him fall. And that love, that unwavering local pride, became the invisible chorus behind every performance, echoing louder than the applause. As the American Idol competition tightened and the stakes climbed higher with every episode, John Foster didn't just hold his ground, he transformed. Week after week, under the crushing weight of national exposure, critical judges, and millions of unpredictable votes, John shed the last layers of the shy, grieving boy from Addis and emerged as something bigger, something unshakable. It wasn't the flashy performances or dramatic key changes that propelled him forward. It was his ability to make people feel. Each time he stepped onto the stage, he wasn't performing a song, he was sharing a piece of his life. Whether he was gently tipping his hat to country greats like Carrie Underwood or Randy Travis, or bravely stepping into the spotlight with another original composition from his own journal of pain, he never once wavered from who he was. No matter how bright the lights or how loud the cameras clicked, John sang like it was still just him, his guitar, and the bayou. And while others scrambled to outsing or outstyle each other, John simply outfelt them. That vulnerability became his superpower. His voice, filled with warmth and grit, began to carry not just grief, but growth. The rawness that once trembled now roared with confidence, and the boy who started with a tribute to his fallen friends evolved into a full-fledged storyteller with a message bigger than any one tragedy. Behind the scenes, he found solace in the camaraderie of his fellow contestants, people who knew what it meant to be vulnerable in front of the world and still show up, still sing, still try. He often called them some of the best people you'll ever meet, and their shared experiences became his second support system, a backstage brotherhood that helped him stay grounded even as his fan base exploded. But John didn't get caught up in the noise. He knew every performance might be his last, and he approached each one with a clear-eyed sense of purpose. It's a one or done, he once said. You make it or you don't. That pressure could have cracked anyone else, but for John, it only carved him deeper. Each chord, each lyric, each trembling breath became more deliberate, more courageous. By the time he landed in the top 10, it was obvious this wasn't luck. This was grit. This was talent molded by tragedy, honed by discipline, and elevated by faith. And while others dreamed of the title, John carried something even more powerful, a voice that couldn't be ignored, and a presence that made people believe again. He wasn't chasing a crown, he was chasing connection, and that's what made him unforgettable. Now, as John Foster stands among the top 10 finalists of one of the biggest talent stages in the world, with millions of eyes watching and his name echoing across homes, far beyond Louisiana, one question lingers like a quiet note at the end of a song. What's next for the boy who sang through pain? But for John, the answer doesn't lie in record deals, celebrity status, or chasing the next viral moment. It lies in something deeper, something that has guided him from the very beginning: purpose. He never set out to become famous. He set out to survive, to heal, and to give voice to the stories too heavy to speak. And now, with a platform he never expected, he's determined to use it not to inflate his image, but to uplift others. His dream isn't just to sell out stadiums or top country charts, it's to be a reminder that from the ashes of unimaginable grief can rise something beautiful, something that breathes life into others. He wants to keep writing, keep singing, and keep connecting with people who, like him, have felt the sting of loss and the silence of loneliness. His music will continue to carry the fingerprints of Maggie and Caroline, and every chord will carry the weight of faith, family, and resilience. Whether he signs with a major label or returns home to play the same church pews where he first found his voice, one thing is certain: John Foster will not disappear. His story has only just begun, and while American Idol may be the launch pad, it won't define him. What will define him is his ability to turn personal tragedy into national empathy, to make people feel seen through the simplest strum of a guitar and the most honest line in a verse. As he looks ahead, his eyes are on the road, but his heart remains anchored in the bayous, in the back roads of Addis, in the people who never stopped believing. He hopes his legacy will be more than music. It will be a testament to what it means to hold on when life begs you to let go, to sing when silence feels safer, and to love louder than loss. For those who've walked through fire, for those who felt unseen, John Foster's journey is proof that sometimes the quietest voices become the ones the world can't stop listening to. And as the final chords of this chapter fade, one truth remains: the world hasn't seen the last of John Foster, not even close.